Good morning, everyone, and welcome to researchED Home. This morning we have John Tomsett with us. I'm delighted to have him with us. He's head teacher at Huntington School, which is a research school. You've been there a long time, John, haven't you?
I have.
So John is obviously also an author and blogger, lovely blog, highly recommend it. And he's someone I've admired for a very long time. So this morning he'll be talking about the curriculum. So I think we're in for a treat. So without further ado, John, if you want to take over.
Lovely. I will. Good morning, everybody. This is a really weird thing because my machine has a camera down the bottom left-hand corner. So sometimes if I need to look at the screen, I might not be looking at you. But what I'm going to do is, in a really kind of gentle way, is share my slides with you. I always do too many slides, but we'll be fine with that. Share my slides with you. I just want to talk about this thing called the core curriculum versus the hinterland. It's something that I am really interested in. A whole load of issues around it. Comes from Christine Counsell, which I'll talk about in a minute. But without further ado, some of you may have heard some of this before, but it's something around just a single lesson that I teach on a single poem, but it kind of brings up all the issues I want to talk about around the core and the hinterland in terms of knowledge and the curriculum. So there's been lots of vocabulary around different types of knowledge, and these are some of the ones you'll have heard: declarative, procedural, conditional. There's the two that I want to talk about: core and hinterland, disciplinary and substantive. And then knowledge rich, all these different ideas around the curriculum, around types of knowledge. And I just try really hard not to overcomplicate it. That said, I want to add my bit to this debate, but it also helps understand what I'm trying to get at. So this is taken from a copy of Impact magazine, the Chartered Colleges magazine, from about 3 editions ago, which is really interesting. And there's kind of it's about 5 levels of knowledge planning and curriculum planning. So there's the first one, which is kind of the overview of the whole thing. Then secondly, you kind of move down from super, what you want by the time that they're 11 or 18, what do you want them to know, understand, and the skills to have. Then there's a macro, which might be across an individual school year in a subject or an area in a school. Then you come down, getting closer and closer to the classroom, half-termly, the meso. And then these two are the ones that I'm really interested in. There's the micro, what you plan to teach in the lesson. And then finally, the nano, when you're in a lesson, the decisions you make about what you teach, and how you respond to student questions and their interests, and how far what limits you have on that. That's really what I want to explore. I think when it comes down to knowledge, I think this has really convinced me about everything. This line from the English language paper 2 examiner's report last year made me think really hard about what English is. There's a lot of debate about what English is at the moment. This is English GCSE. When you read that and you realise that the people who do best at English GCSE at 16 are those who are in classrooms, are in homes where you sit around the table and you talk about all these things with your middle class educated parents. And just, if you don't teach this stuff in school, then our disadvantaged students just get further and further behind. And I think these lines here convince me of how important it is to know stuff, to really, really know stuff. Because you can't understand lots of what we do in the curriculum without a whole range of other knowledge to come together. So I think that's, I think English language papers are really testing general studies. They're more like general studies papers in some ways than English necessarily. So here she is, Christine Counsell. I think she's great. I've got the deepest respect for Christine and the work she does. And I use this definition of core knowledge and the hinterland all the time. going off piste, with your passion about why you went into teaching and your subject. And I went into teaching 30 odd years ago purely because I loved English, not because I had some burning desire for social equality or anything. That's why I did it. I went into it because I got to the age of 24 and thought, how can I continue to read books and get paid for it? It seemed like a good deal to me. So I went into English purely for the subject and my love of the subject. In fact, I now teach business studies and economics. Is neither here nor there. I still essentially an English teacher. So it's about going off piste and how far you can go off piste. So this is War Photographer by Duffy. It's a poem some of you may know well. It's on the AQA specification in the Power and Conflict booklet anthology. I'm just going to read you the poem. War Photographer by Duffy. In his dark room, he is finally alone, with spores of suffering set out in ordered rows. The only light is red and softly glows, as though this were a church and he a priest, preparing to intone a mass. Belfast, Beirut, Phnom Penh, all flesh is grass. He has a job to do. Solutions slop in trays beneath his hands, which did not tremble then, though seem to now. Rural England, home again to ordinary pain, which simple weather can dispel, to fields which don't explode beneath the feet of running children in a nightmare heat. Something is happening. The stranger's features faintly start to twist before his eyes, a half-formed ghost. He remembers the cries of this man's wife, how he sought approval without words to do what someone must, and how the blood stained into foreign dust. 100 agonies in black and white, from which his editor will pick out 5 or 6 for Sunday supplement. The reader's eyeballs prick with tears between the bath and pre-lunch beers. In the aeroplane, he stares impassively at where he earns his living, and they do not care. So that's the poem. And I always begin teaching that story, teaching that poem with that, and the fact that if you don't know, as a 15 or a 16-year-old, how photographs were made before digital technology, you can't really understand a lot of the poem. So I spent a lot of time teaching them how that works. So lots of them haven't seen one of those. I bet there's some people listening now and watching now who've not seen a roll of film that goes in an old-fashioned SLR camera. I still use my SLR camera. My wife bought me before we were married, so it must be at least 33 years old. I took it in quite recently to Jessop's to have it serviced. The bloke looked at me and said, "Don't bother, mate. No one uses these anymore." So I just took it away and cleaned it up myself, and I still use it now and then. But fascinating stuff. And if you don't know what a darkroom is and how, that's a darkroom. That's a darkroom. I'll show you a darkroom in action in a second. You can't really understand bits of the poem, especially the opening. So I then show this video, and you don't need any sound this, but I'll talk you through what happens when you actually develop a picture yourself, a photo yourself. In my first 2 schools, both at Eastbourne Sixth Form College and at Hove Park and in Sussex, they both had darkrooms. So when I started teaching 30 odd years ago, Jeff Hands, the art teacher, taught me how to print my own prints. And I spent hours and hours and hours and hours alone in the darkroom making my own prints. So this is what happens. It's a short video, and I'll talk you through what happens. You can find this on the internet, and if you need it. So a darkroom looks like that, has lots of sinks and water and stuff. It has this thing called an enlarger, which we'll look at in a second. So when you get your print, when you get your negatives, they're about 1.25 inches big. And you load that into the enlarger. You can see how small these mini images are. They're called negatives, so they're back to front in terms of the blacks and the whites. You pop that into the enlarger. And one of the things you need to know is that when you're setting this up, you can see how through that instrument the image is enlarged. You need to know that actually photographic paper reacts to ordinary light, and you can't open a pack of photographic paper in ordinary light without ruining it. So you put all the lights out and you have infrared lights on. So that's why dark rooms are red. That's why the light is red, because infrared light doesn't affect the paper, but it does allow you to see. And that's crucial for understanding the poem. So you can imagine 15, 16-year-olds who've only ever been used to taking photos on their phone. They can't believe this. So you put the light down, the light that comes down from the top of the enlarger is actually ordinary light. And you then put the paper into this is called the developer tray, and you can start to see the image that's just been put onto the photograph paper start to come out. If you left that in there, it would just go black in the end, right? So you swim it around in the developer, in this case for about 90 seconds. Then you pop it in another tray called the fixer tray, and that fixes the chemicals on top of the piece of paper. No, sorry, it's a stop bath and then the fixed tray. You put it in the stop bath, that stops the development, otherwise it would go black. And then in the final tray, the third tray, you'll get fixer. And that fixes the chemicals on the piece of paper. So you take the students through that process, and you can see there are the solutions that slop around. And if you don't understand this process, you can't understand the poem. At the end of that, you then wash it all off. You can turn the light back on. You can turn ordinary light on because the paper won't be affected anymore. You wash it in water, squeegee all the water off, and you can see that. And then you hang it up to dry, and there you've got a print from a negative. And for 95% of the students I teach, that is complete revelation. The only ones who've seen it before are those who have dads of my age who've done the same obsessive thing when they were in their 20s. So there's the photo from the negative, and it's all like a piece of magic. So when you look at this opening stanza, first of all, there's the dark room. You explain what spools are, because you take that film in. I'll talk about ordered rows in a minute, a bit later in the presentation. The only light is red and softly glows. You can see why that is. So now makes complete sense. Otherwise, you're talking about red lights. There's all sorts of connotations that are completely inappropriate for this poem. And then you start to unpick the poem, but without that knowledge, it's a much harder poem to understand. And the thing that I'm kind of obsessed with, and is my passion, I've had 4 or 5 heroes in my life. Seamus Heaney was one of them, obviously, Eric Cantona, Seti Ballesteros, and my photographic hero is Don McCullum. And this is Don McCullum, the photographer. Some people have heard of him, some people not. And what I do show, and I'm not going to show it on here, there's some videos of interviews with him. I love that photo. He's 83 now, 84 now, I think, Don McCullum. I love how bloody handsome he is. Great hair. But also I love the work he does and hear him talk about it. So it's a couple of brilliant interviews. There's one interview, and it's a Dunhill sponsored one. You can find it on YouTube, where he says, "I hate the term war photographer. I hate being called that. I've spent my life, 50 years, taking photographs for what? For nothing. It's changed nothing. I've done nothing." And he now takes photographs of landscapes, which I'll talk about in a bit. But quite interesting that actually Caroline Duffy's poem is about this specific war photographer. He began in the East End. He had a camera. This is a gang he used to hang out with. He's really rock hard. He's a tough bloke. And he used to hang around with this group of this gang in the East End in the late 50s. They let him take these photos. This gang had just murdered policemen. And they let him take the photos. He sold them to the Observer. The Observer loved them. They published them, And from that point on, he became a photographer. And his life, he went to some of the worst places in the world, some of the most difficult conflicts. He loved the danger of being in a conflict zone. And huge number of tales that he tells. One of the tales that I tell the students all this stuff. This is a brilliant, he talks about this in the Dunhill video. This is his camera, and you can see just in the near side there's a hole in the very top of the camera there, just this side of where it says Nikon. And that's where he had the camera in front of his face, and a sniper shot him, and the bullet went into the camera and stuck in the camera as he had it in front of his face, otherwise he'd be dead. He tells that story brilliantly. And he used to go, his first place he went to where it was really dangerous was to Cyprus. This is the Cypriot Civil War, 1964, unbelievable photo. He loves getting right in the heart of things. You can see there, that photo is amazing because you've got a bloke in his ordinary clothes, but with a AK-47 in his hand. So you see how close he used to get to the stuff. And the next photo is really important for the poem. So the next photo is what I think is the photo that the poem is about. He went into this kitchen, he was in this house, and he walked into the kitchen, and there was these two dead people, these two blokes who had just been shot, lying in the pools of blood, and he was taking photos, and the family came in, and the family didn't know they were dead, and he stopped taking photos, and he had no language to communicate with them about these two dead blokes. It was a brother and a husband, and the woman there gestured to him because they couldn't communicate that he should continue to take the photos. So he continued taking the photos with their agreement, and that's absolutely crucial for the poem. Then he came outside and took this photo, which is one of his most famous photos, and I talked to the students about what an unbelievably brilliant photo it is in terms of a photo of utter grief. I love the little lad with a skinhead haircut in the front, kind of trying to calm his mum down, and her face, the twisted face. It's also, I'm also fascinated by photographs. You know, look at the whole thing. You've got the two blokes far left-hand corner, the little lad on the top. Clearly, it's a Sunday. He's just been to church. He's got his tie on, I think, and people are looking smart. Really fascinating photo. And then when you read the poem, something is happening. The stranger's features faintly start to twist before his eyes, a half-formed ghost. Now that is clearly, if you've not watched how that video about how photos are developed, you don't understand what that means. But you can see it now, because when you swish the solution around what I always used to love was the image starts to come out of nothing, out of the white of the paper. He remembers the cries of this man's wife, how he sought approval without words to do what someone must. Someone must take the photograph, must bear witness to the terror, and how the blood stained into foreign dust. And you can see, actually, the twist is the twist of that woman's face. You look at that woman's face. Incredible pain and agony. And there's the blood. There's the foreign blood. So I think it's really important that you understand lots more about the history and the background of McCullum to understand the poem. McCullum went on to be most famous for his work in Vietnam. That's one of his most famous photographs. A couple of years ago, it was 50 years since these photos were taken. I point out a few things. Just how close he is. You can see in the very foreground, in the close-up foreground, you've got the edge of the soldier's helmet and the gun, and you've got that picture there. And that's a question. And iconically, what does that remind you of? And of course, it's Jesus being taken off the cross. But he was in there, and they did a piece in the Sunday Times 2 years ago, 50 years on, where they tracked down the soldiers of who Don McCullum had taken the photographs of, and that soldier survived. And McCullum actually picked him up when the two soldiers brought him down. McCullum put him on his shoulder and took him down into the ambulance that was waiting at the bottom of the hill. And that guy's still alive, and they tracked him down. Amazing photograph. that photograph. He talks about the photograph a lot. You've got the athleticism of what could be an athlete, maybe throwing a javelin, but actually he's throwing the grenade. Brilliantly caught the grenade. There's nothing without the grenade, that photograph. 30 seconds later, that same soldier had his hand shot by a sniper. And he says, McCullum talks about it, but his hand was just like a piece of cabbage. It was completely gone. So he caught that just before the guy was shot. His most famous photograph is that one. That's an unnamed soldier suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. Amazing photograph. He took 5 shots of that, one after the other, and they're all exactly the same. About 8 years ago, 10 years ago, went over to Manchester to the Imperial War Museum and saw one of those prints for real. And I talked to the students about, you know, how unbearably excited I was about seeing that photograph for real. And McCullum prints all his own prints, even now. Incredible photograph. And then I talk about actually, if you get a film and you either get them in 24s or 36s, this is absolutely crucial, and you lay them out on the paper. You develop the film, and you lay it out on the paper, and then you put the paper underneath the enlarger. You put the paper with the negatives on underneath the enlarger, and you get what's called a contact print. It's called a contact print because the negatives are in contact with the photographic paper. And then you get a print like that, and then you don't have to print all 36 out or 24 out. You can choose which ones you want to print out. So back in the day, a photo editor of a magazine, on a Sunday newspaper, would have to do that. And then they choose. You can see the circled ones, the ones in red. You would choose 5 or 6 that you would print out, and that was crucial for understanding the poem. So they're set out in ordered rows. The scores are suddenly set out, and then there are the ordered rows of 6. And you look at this one, 100 agonies in black and white, from which his editor will pick out 5 or 6 for Sunday supplement. And that's how they pick out 5 or 6. They decide which 5 or 6 to print. So all this background stuff that I'm providing for the students is helping them understand the poem, maybe the surface of the poem. But if you don't understand the surface of the poem, what the actual content means, it's really easy to get a really poor interpretation of the poem, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So you transfer the photographs into the magazines themselves, because when you look at the Sunday supplement, say back to the poem, is there to pick up 5 or 6 for Sunday supplement, I haven't got a flying clue what a Sunday supplement is. None of them. I mean, last year's GCSE, where actually War for Photography came up as the chosen poem in the exam. I don't think one student said their family got a newspaper on a Sunday. They don't know what a Sunday supplement is. You have to show them what it is. It's the glossy magazine that comes with the Sunday newspaper. So back in the day, when he moved from the Observer to the Sunday Times, they published his work and all these photographs, several front covers of the Sunday Times. There's another one from the Vietnam for the Sunday Times. That's from Biafra. He went out to Biafra to cover the famine. Incredible photograph. There's the soldier who had his hand shot off. So what I also showed the students is how you take the photograph and put it into the context of a Sunday supplement. And this was entitled, This Is How It Is. And what McCullum always wanted to do was show the truth of what was happening. There's another one. That's the only photograph he's ever only slightly doctored. He got to that dead body of a Viet Cong, and the Americans were really just looting him, looting the dead body and being really abusive, two soldiers went off, and McCullen said, I was infuriated by them. And he set that up with the picture of the girlfriend of the dead person, just to show actually, no matter who he was, that young soldier had a family and a personality. That's a great one from Northern Ireland, to the riots. I think it's the riots in Derry, made entirely because of the two women in the doorways. And when the woman on the right in the doorway, just an amazing kind of moment to capture her horror as the British soldiers went up the street into the Republican demonstrators. And there it is, the siege of Derry. There you show the students how you transfer that photograph into the magazine. So there's the context stripped again. And the other thing I talk about is making choices, because it talks in the poem, if you remember, about the picture editor of the Sunday Supplement choosing 5 or 6, and the reader looking at them before they go to the pub for Sunday lunch. So choosing 5 or 6 is a really hard gig. When I used to teach this, I used to teach photography and media studies A-level 30 years ago. I had a brilliant piece of video. It was narrated by Eamon McCabe, a Guardian photographer, and it was about the choice of photographs that were used to cover the first Iraq War, 1991. The first Iraq War, those of you who are alive then, I'm sure there's lots of people who are listening now who are too young to remember that. The first Iraq War, it lasted about a month, I think, and they signed the peace agreement and they signed the end of the war, and the Iraq army were going back from Kuwait back into Iraq, and they're going up the Basra Road, and the Americans decided to bomb the army, even though they were retreating, even though the war was over. The B-52s just obliterated the army, and that is a picture showing how that army was obliterated up the Basra Road. Now, the piece of video that I had was talked about the choices you make when you're deciding which photograph to use. And the Sunday Times picture editor at the time said, look, I didn't want anything graphic. I didn't want to upset my readers. They've got children, they're sitting around the table on a Sunday. I can't upset them over breakfast. That's just not right. So he used that. He said, I can show that photograph and it's fine. They understand it's pretty graphically awful if you're in one of those vehicles, but I'm not upsetting people around the breakfast table on a Sunday with what it's really like to be burnt alive. The Observer newspaper picture editor said, no way, I'm going to print exactly what it's like. And he printed a very famous photograph by Ken Jaraki, and this is the photograph here. And that's an Iraqi soldier who's literally fried to death in his seat in his Jeep. And I show these two to students because I ask them I ask them the question, what should you do? What choices do you make when you're deciding which photographs and what news to publish about terrible events? So, not a great talking point, but only available because I'm gone right off piste now. I'm going to go much more off piste. Going back to the core versus hinterland, I'm going way off piste now, and my knowledge of this stuff is beyond possibly 99% of all teachers teaching this poem. And I'll ask some questions at the end about how far off piste should you be allowed to go. Coming back to the poem, there's the opening stanza. And I ask the question when I present this live, is what do you need to know in order to understand thoroughly the opening stanza of War Photographer? Well, when you look at it, you need to know what a darkroom is, you need to know what a spool is, why that's called spools of suffering, why it's there in ordered rows, why the only light is red, what a priest is, what's a mass? I mean, number of classes I've asked, you know, what is a mass? I've got no idea what a Catholic mass is, what the word intone means. Then what happened in Belfast, Beirut, Phnom Penh, where all flesh is grass comes from. There's a ton of stuff in there, a ton of knowledge that you need to know if you're going to understand the poem. And this is where I got into, calling it a Twitter spat was just clickbait on Twitter last night, I think. But I got into a really good conversation with Christine Counsell about this. She tweeted this tweet. It began with Lawrence Foley. Lawrence Foley saying, I remember arriving at university and studying a 19th century novel module, absolutely baffled by the biblical references on the account of my limited RE education. It's so important. And Christine replied, this is really important. This is why knowledge is important. And she said this, that, and the other. How can you teach? This is what she's meaning. Caroline Duffy's war photographer without transubstantiation. And knowledge alters what we see. In the TS later that week, she said this: you try understanding Caroline Duffy's poem War Photographer without knowing about transubstantiation, you're completely lost. I don't think you are completely lost if you don't know what transubstantiation is. I don't think you are completely lost. I think that's a massive exaggeration. And I replied, it's much simpler. Right? The black and white photographic printing process, infrared light, who on earth on McCullum, a Sunday supplement. I asked my students if they knew where Belfast was, and one of them said it's in Wales. Right? So the actual knowledge they need to understand the poem goes really deep. So we carried on our conversation, Christine and I. She talked about the poem, and this is a really interesting, some really interesting comments here, which I really like. The transubstantiation thing is really important, I think, but at quite a profound level, and there's loads of layers before you need to get to transubstantiation. I think the middle tweet there, a stranger's features faintly start to twist before his eyes are half-formed ghosts. I think the verb twist is genius, capturing the photographic paper bobbing about in the chemicals. I don't think that is within the field of interpretation. I don't think twist refers to the bobbing about of the photographic paper. Then she goes on to talk about the suffering of others, a writhing and agony, one can barely understood, transcendent, terrifying, mysterious and meaning yet present in every day, the routine, tears between the bath and pre-lunch beers. I don't think, I'm not sure. Ineffability and the price of incarnate love. Come round to talking about stuff. I mean, I replied thus. More prosaically, it might be this image. Especially if you know the story behind the photograph, like I do. He found the dead husband first, and asked permission to take the shot. They did not share a language. I think that's what it's about. I think that's what's at the heart of the poem. And you can see the twist. The twist is, I think it's Duffy conflating the two photographs. One of the dead bodies on the floor in the blood, and the twist on that woman's face. I think she conflates the two photographs really well. And then I said this, and there's the debate, which I've just articulated to you. And then I blogged about it, having thought about what Christine Counsell said. I then blogged about it, having taught the poem again. And I did actually reference the transubstantiation thing. I linked it to The Godfather, because I don't know if you know The Godfather at the end of the film, where there's Michael does the massive assassination of all the rival dons across New York, and that whole thing around the careful preparation, the hands and the links. There's a whole load of things that I think, in the same way, when you're laying out, you've got to be really precise when you're laying out all your photographic materials, ready to print a photograph. In the same way, you do it in a very, very kind of methodical way. It does feel very kind of almost spiritual about how you do stuff. So works really well. all sorts of stuff you need to know before you get to transubstantiation. But it works. So we kind of came to a very pleasant end. And that was Christine's final tweet to me. But it was an interesting discussion. Do you need to know transubstantiation to understand that poem? Or is actually understanding what a dark room is and why the light is red in the start, is that what you need to know? Before you get to transubstantiation. I'm sure you could get an A-star answer to the poem if you didn't know transubstantiation, but I'm not sure you could if you didn't know what a dark room was. On the other hand, I love the transubstantiation stuff, right? Because you've got the paper, which is like the flesh, and you've got the liquid, which is like the blood, and out of the two, you create a body. And I think it works brilliantly. But I think there are layers of knowledge that you need. And sometimes the layers of knowledge are really, really surface level, but then you can understand things more profoundly. So, coming back to the core knowledge, how far can we go off piste? When I teach that poem, do I go too far off piste? You can see, hopefully, how passionate I am about that stuff. Do I go too far off piste? So I'm going to come back to Don McCullum, because I keep going. I'm off piste, but I go really off piste. There's a really good interview that he did with CNN. There's McCullum there. He got so into the fighting that he donned all the garb of a soldier. There he is in the middle there. There's a brilliant. You can get it on YouTube. There's a brilliant film called McCullum. Excuse me. And it's an hour and a half long documentary, not for the faint-hearted, but brilliant. There's a moment where he's a young photographer, and he just talks to camera. He says, "I really love wars. I love going to wars. I love the excitement of it. I want to go to 3 a year, 4 a year, but I know if I go to 3 or 4 a year, I'll kill myself. But I love wars. It's really important." And he's just like in a zombied state. And he talks about how, looking back, he had gone slightly mad. And I always think with Don McCullum, there is that edge of danger that has affected him. And he talks about how you cannot see some of the things he's seen and not be affected by the whole process. And I love that photograph. I've talked about that photograph already. And there's some details of that photograph that clearly I pick up on in a minute. So last year, in February to May last year, they had a Don McCullum retrospective. All his photographs, all his major photographs were at the Tate. And what was brilliant about it was that Don McCullum printed every single one himself. He's 80, like I say, he's 84 now. Every single print was actually done by his own hands. I took my son and I bought lots of bits and bobs and lots of souvenirs. I bought this poster. I bought a copy of this poster for the exhibition, and in one of my classes, I gave it out as a prize for writing the best paragraph of analysis of the Caroline Duffy poem. And I took my son. I took my 19-year-old son, and he was blown away by it, as was I. And it was an exhibition where all the photographs that I've loved were there, and you knew that he'd printed them. And I tell the students all about it. And at the end of it, I was kind of exhausted. It was one of those things where you had to sit down every so often because it was exhausting, emotionally exhausting. And I wanted to write a review, but I couldn't write the review because the Guardian reviewer had written the review that I would have written. Brilliant review. So I wrote a sonnet. So I show the students this sonnet that I wrote, and I'm just going to read that to you. There's the book, by the way. That's the book that you get. There's my copy. I just love it. It's an amazing book. If you've got a spare 40 quid, get on Amazon after you finish watching this. This is the poem I wrote about that exhibition. McCullum. Death confronts us all. I still pass slaughters, cruel tortures, tiptoe round our country's dregs, skirt a foreign father, his dead daughter, amputees, spent beggars on their last legs, protruding ribs, unwarranted arrests, executions, slain bodies gape, unsown, lost souls, the dispossessed, McCullen's best, his greatest hits, shot after shot rips home. He haunts each room, his liver-spotted hands birthed every print. In reverential awe I stand, transfixed, this gentle artisan, for one last time, displaying what he saw. Here is my work, he seems to say, enough. And injured there, beneath the gore, breathes love. I wrote that poem, and I talk about that poem a lot in terms of I wanted to use a Shakespeare sonnet, rhymes A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, G, G. It was interesting, there's some elements of it that are similar to Caroline Duffy's poem in just the list, you know, Belfast, Beirut, Phnom Penh. And it's also, every single references a photograph, a specific photograph. And also, when I was in the exhibition, I felt like I was an intruder on private grief. And also, so stealing past slaughters, tiptoeing, skirting, just avoiding stuff, because it felt like you were imposing yourself. And McCullen talks about that a lot. And one afternoon last February, March, I had a house to myself. So I also made a film of the poem. I'm going to read over the top of it. I'm going to show you the film. Hopefully you can see the film. I'm going to read over the film and read you the poem over the film as well. Here we go. McCullen. Death confronts us all. I still past slaughters, cruel tortures, tiptoe around our country's dregs, skirt a foreign father, his dead daughter, amputees, spent beggars on their last legs, protruding ribs, unwarranted arrests, executions, slain bodies gape, unsown, lost souls, the dispossessed, McCullen's best, his greatest hits, shot after shot rips home. He haunts each room, his liver-spotted hands birthed every print. In reverential awe, I stand transfixed. This gentle artisan, for one last time, displaying what he saw. Here is my work, he seems to say, enough. And injured there, beneath the gore, breathes love. I sent the poem to Tom McCullen, and his wife responded, which was really nice. I also sent it to the Tate. And what interests me is how much I should be going off piste or not. When it comes to teaching English and teaching the core concepts of English, I don't think I understood much. I got my grade A at A-level before I went to university, but I don't think I understood much until I understood the relationship between the form and content, the relationship between the form which you're using and what you're trying to say. And it's unbelievable, an essential element of literary criticism. And so I asked a question to one class. It was a year 9 class I was teaching this poem to. And I asked the question, why did Caroline Duffy write the poem in 4 6-line stanzas? Like, why? She knew what she wanted to say, you know what the content is. Why did she do it? And I use this thing called the field of interpretation. Too often I get students who think they can say anything because it's their opinion about a piece of literature. And I use a whiteboard and I put a dot in the middle, which I think is the precise meaning that the writer intended. I know because I write my own stuff. You can write stuff where there's a meaning that you didn't even realize yourself was there when you're writing poems or writing writing anything. But there's the centre. And then there's a field of interpretations, things that you can justify from the text. And then there are ideas about the poem that are completely outside, that actually interpretations don't add up. So they would be outside the field of interpretation, So when I'm teaching, a student will say, well, I think it's this. And I'll ask another student, where's that on the field of interpretation? Is it outside the field completely? Is it inside on the edge? Or is it right near the centre? Do you think they're really getting to it? And that's a great thing for debating. So coming back to this, why is the poem War Photographer written in 4 6-line stanzas? And then I put that up. And of course, Lily said, well, it's because you lay the photographs out in ordered rows in 6s. You either got 24 or 36, either 6 6s or 4 6s. And there's your 4 6s. It's a reel of 24 film, isn't it? That's why she writes it like that. And she said also then, she said, you know, you do get, what's interesting, she said, because we'd watched the stuff and McCullen had talked about what he was trying to do in the war. She said, well, what's really interesting about it is that alone doesn't rhyme. You've got rows and glows and mass and grass. So you've got some rhyme and some non-rhyme. And there's an order in the rhyme. There's also some disorder that he can't make sense of. Unbelievable, right? Year 9. But she could only get to that level of understanding of the relationship between form and content because of all the other stuff I taught them and how far I'd gone off piste. So you come back to Christine Counsell near the end now. That's what she says about that, allowing disadvantaged pupils to clamber into the discourse and practice of educated people so that they gain the powers of the powerful. I've done all that last spring. And interestingly, a girl called Soraya, I taught her very first lesson in year 7 when she started the school. She was in year 11 last year. She's now in the 6th form. She came up to me in the dining hall and said this. Hey, sir, I was watching the news last night and there was a thing on about Don McCullen, that photographer you were talking about in English. It was about his exhibition. I could tell my mum and dad all about him. They were really impressed. There it is. There it is. It made real why we need to go beyond the core and why the hinterland, I think, is probably really important and giving those students the knowledge to clamber onto the discourse of the educated. I'm going to finish with some questions. I'm not really going to answer these questions. These are questions for people who are watching to think about. In your school, who's in control of the curriculum? How far do individual teachers have agency? The enacted curriculum, I think, is at that nano level, right? It's at the micro and the nano level about what happens in the classroom compared to what's written down in the scheme of learning or what's been prescribed by the subject leader. Think about it, you know, all of us at Huntington at least have degrees in our specialist subjects. What are the barriers that stop you acquiring expert knowledge? And when you do have that expert knowledge within the department or an area, what support structures do you need? Just giving someone a book or a talk about stuff isn't enough. And then when does going off piste become teacher self-indulgence? I'm the head teacher, right? No one's going to have a go at me for being unbelievably self-indulgent. I think some of the stuff I do about McCullen is probably self-indulgent. I'm sure it is, but that's a really big question as well. I'm going to finish with a tale. That is utterly my favourite photograph taken by Don McCullen. January 1967, Scarborough Beach has the big hotel up on the hill there. 4 footballers, only months after England had won the World Cup. Brilliant photograph made entirely because of where the football is. I love the rockabilly quiff haircut of the guy on the left. Amazing photograph. And I thought, a couple of years ago, I think it was now, I'd like a print of that. I'd like a Don McCullen hand-printed print of that. So I emailed his gallery that deals with that kind of stuff, and I got a response from his wife. This is when he was printing all his prints ready for his exhibition. I'm afraid Donna's not really selling his prints. His archive's being evaluated. Cost over $4,000 for that, for a print. Last year there was a documentary on BBC about Don McCullum, and he did say to somebody met about that image, it's been a really good money spinner. So yeah, if you're charging $4,000 per print, I'm sure it has done. So I replied, thanks ever so much. I actually wrote about it, about that print. It says there, I got up at the Sunday after I dropped my son off for the first time at university, and I wrote about it. I wrote a piece about that picture, invoking Ozymandias and stuff and the sands. I said there, I'd just love Don to read my essay I wrote about it, and if Don will send me a print, I'll start saving. And then a week later, I got an email back from Catherine, but from Don McCullum himself. Don McCullum had dictated it to her, and this is what he said. And I'm thinking, as I'm reading through it, I'm thinking, come on, you love that, you love my essay so much, I've got a free print in the post. Don says, it's so rewarding that something I did so many years ago has the power to inspire such brilliant words. This is so learned, so well written. It's almost a book. I'm very touched by it. Thank you. As I dropped off my son at boarding school last year, I understand the sentiment behind it too. In regards to Don McCullum, no free print. Oh, well. Just a couple of things to say. I write a little bit about a chapter. I wrote a chapter about curriculum in the latest book. We've got a book launch next week, and that's on the, I think that's on the 16th, and on the Friday the 19th, Tom, Mary and myself are doing a second series of the curriculum thinking. If you're interested in that, there's the link for that too. That's my lot. I don't know what I need to do now. Helen, do I stop sharing?
Yep.
There you go.
And we can go. Thank you, John. Thanks for that. As an English teacher, it was particularly interesting, obviously. Someone's asking about the unseen section of the exam paper.
Right. What
So if 4 photographers turned up, they would need to do the best they can on their own, which reinforces the point about not narrowing education and knowledge too early. Example, avoiding a 3-year GCSE, etc. So more of a comment on
Nice.
on what you said. But yeah, we can teach them as much as we can on the set text in the hope that, you know, they will retain something, I suppose. But for me, the question is, you know, how much can we go off piste, you know, all the time? Because first of all, it's very difficult to gather enough knowledge about everything that we teach, and 2, time constraints. Someone said, your explanation is excellent. You mentioned that you teach a range of subjects now. Where do you start with researching the knowledge that is more hinterland than core knowledge?
I remember teaching Death of a Salesman a few years ago, and then finding out all the stuff that goes behind that and theories of tragedy and stuff. It's why I went to study English at university anyway. I mean, the pleasure I get out of doing that nourishes all the other work I do, and I think that's really, really crucial. And I use corners of the week, what I call corners of the weekend, to do my writing and stuff. So, you know, when everybody goes to bed at 11 o'clock on a Friday night, I stay up till 12. When people get up at 8, I get up at 7, and those hours all added up over a weekend. I used to have a theory when I was in the sixth form, when I was a kid. I used to go to bed as late as I could on a Friday, get up as early as I could on a Saturday, as late to bed on a Saturday evening, up early on a Sunday, late to bed on a Sunday evening, then recover during the week, spend most of the weekend awake doing stuff. And I've kind of never lost that habit, really. So I try and pick up corners of the weekend. And there's it's so much easier to research stuff now than when I was a kid. And just finding that stuff out, it's just nourishing, I think.
Yeah. I mean, that's it. It's also the idea that the more you start delving into things, the more you find out, and sometimes it's a bit of a rabbit hole. But yeah, you're right. It's really important to read around what you're teaching. Someone was just asking, I'm just going to go to that first. Can you please go back to the last slide, because someone was wanting to catch the link. That's not too much.
I'll share the slides. I'll share the slides for people. I'll put a tweet out in half an hour or so with the link to the slides. That's helpful. Is that okay?
Yeah, I'm sure. What should we as teachers, is very, very similar. What should we as teachers focus on? Teaching for knowledge, or teaching for the passion of our subjects, or share our passion to give a depth, I think they mean a deep knowledge of the topics, or teach for results as the core? I'm not sure I completely understand this question.
I think they're all the same thing, aren't they? If I hadn't shared my passion and stuff about the poem and about war photographer, then Lily couldn't have made that connection between the four rows of six, and why Caroline Duffy wrote the poem in that form. You know, I think they're utterly the same thing. And you can't, you know, there's, I don't know how many are there, 15, 20 poems to cover. I won't be covering every poem in the anthology in the depth and the passion that I have about war photography. Right? There are others in there that don't quite float my boat as much. But that one, absolutely. And I think what I love about it, it feels, you know, we used to teach the International Baccalaureate until we couldn't afford it anymore. And that felt like a course that was proper education, rather than schooling to jump through hoops. So it was a proper education. And then, you know, I think that's what you really want to do, isn't it? To educate people rather than teach them to jump through hoops. Do the hoop jumping right at the end. You do a couple of mock or so and show them how to do the exam technique. But without the knowledge and the understanding, they can't do it no matter how good their exam technique is.
In fact, sometimes I wonder if you just teach a lot of interesting stuff and don't worry too much about the shape of the response or anything like that. I'm thinking, you know, in history, for example, or even in English. My bet is that, particularly with new specs, increasingly students could score quite highly with a lot of the knowledge, even if it's not perfectly formed. But I'm not sure. I had another thing I wanted to ask you, it's just slipped out of my head. In any case, I think we've come to the end of the hour anyway. So, I do have a lesson to teach soon, so I'm going to have to let you go. But I found that utterly fascinating, and I certainly, as an English teacher, I never taught the idea of the 6 rows. So you've taught me something this morning.
Within the field of interpretation, it must be within that field of interpretation.
Yeah, I really like that. I really like this idea of the interpretation.
And you get loads of arguments amongst the students. You just stand back and they just fight with each other.
I think you would get a lot of arguments amongst teachers as well. You know, many think that, you know, any interpretation is a valid interpretation.
What's a valid interpretation and what isn't? And can you back it up with evidence from the text?
Okay.
Right. Nice.
All right, that was great. Something just came in.
We nearly finished.
Someone was just saying, as a final comment, in many ways then, are you not just teaching them passion for knowledge? I suppose we are.
Not at all. Well, that's not all I'm doing. I think hopefully you're being a role model for being a scholar, right? Of going away and actually understanding stuff and being committed to it, right? I don't know how. No one learns from anybody who stands there robotically with churning out stuff without any feeling for what they're teaching. That seems to me the drive way, the almost awful way. You've got to have some investment in what you're teaching.
And I think it's a very nice place to stop. So thank you very much, John, for your time this morning. And have a lovely day. I'll let you go.
Lovely weekend.
Okay, you take care. And everyone, we will see you again next week at 11. On Monday, we have Philippa Cordingley. So really, really looking forward to this one. We also have a wonderful program next week, so we'll share that today. have a great day, a great weekend. See you next week. Bye-bye.